We good out there? Good evening, everyone. Good evening, and thank you for attending Let's Talk Data Centers. I'm Stephanie Brown from Soy City Indivisible. Thrilled to be hosting these presenters from Prairie Rivers Network, Citizens Utility Board, and Illinois People's Action, who are taking time out of their busy lives to community because they care about all communities. Tonight, we should come away with a better understanding of the issues created by proliferation of centers, as well as the uniquely complicated situation facing Decatur and Macon County. I invited local decision makers to this evening's event. Councilman Cooper and Horn responded that they would not be able to make it, but we'd like to acknowledge those leaders in attendance for choosing to be part of tonight's learning opportunity. If the mayor or people from the Decatur City Council are here, could you please stand? Thank you. Can those from the Macon County Board please stand? And can those from the Citizens Volunteer Advisory Committee please stand? There should be time for audience questions at the end of the presentation. If you're watching online and have a question, please type it in the comments and we'll try to capture it. So with that, please help me welcome our first presenter, Andrew Rain from Prairie Rivers Network.
Hey everybody, I'm going to call an audible. I was getting a little hum. Are we getting a little hum when I speak? We're good? Okay, great. I can just hear it up here. I'm Andrew Rain with Prairie Rivers Network. Today I'm going to be presenting with Scott Allen with the Citizens Utility Board and Dawn Dannenbring with Illinois People's Action. So tonight you're going to hear a little bit about data centers. The agenda is pretty simple. We're going to do a brief overview to kind of explain what is a data center and why are we talking about it now. We're going to talk about some of the impacts that data centers can have. Then we're going to talk about some of the solutions to those impacts. And then we're going to give you some next steps. So it should be pretty easy. And we're going to start with the basics of what is a data center. Oh, no, actually, we're going to start with who are we? So a couple of groups up here. We're actually, three of us are part of something called the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition. And we're working on a bill called the Power Act, which you'll hear about tonight. And the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition is a group of environmental, faith-based, consumer interests, and other groups that have come together to work on climate policy in Illinois over the years. And while we work on climate policy, we know that you can't just do things in isolation. And so working on data centers is about working on climate, but it's also about working on water. It's also about our utility bills. It's also about our people and our communities. And so when we work on something, we bring in all aspects of that together. And so you'll be, the goal of today is to provide some education on data centers to inform that sort of policy development. So what is a data center? Simple definition is a data center is a building meant to store computer chips that can generate computing power to run things like the internet, AI, creating AI and running AI, storing data. We've had data centers actually for a very, very long time. Decades, but the scale of data centers has really changed, and I'll get into that in a minute. What goes into a data center, again, it's actually pretty simple. It's kind of a warehouse with a bunch of cooling equipment in it and a bunch of computer chips. So those computer chips that do that computing, which is the goal of the data center, the energy to power those computer chips, they're very, very energy intensive. Water often for cooling. There are some data centers that do not use water for cooling, but water is often a large input. And then data centers use a lot of land. For the big ones, we're talking hundreds of acres. We are seeing data centers that are the size of Central Park in New York. So really the scale of these has been changing a lot. And why has it been changing? Generative AI. So you might have heard of ChatGPT or Claude or any of these generative AIs. These are the what is creating the industry's need to have these bigger data centers. To train an AI model, you need to have computing power really close to the chips need to be close to each other. That distance between the chips matters for their ability to train these AI models. And so they're looking to build bigger and bigger data centers that can train the AI models so that they can win this AI race that's happening out there. Using AI models also uses some fair amount of computing, but it's the training that uses the most. And then there's, again, data centers are still used to, like, store your emails and that kind of thing. But all these data centers look a bit different from each other. And it's the generative AI ones that are truly creating the hyperscale demand. So that's a term, kind of a term of art, but hyperscalers means, oh, wow, the really big data center, that's a hyperscaler. And we're looking at a 10-fold increase, and that number is probably changing as we speak, measured by energy demand of how much energy is going to be consumed by data centers in Illinois. And just to give you a sense of where they're located, this thing might be low battery. Oh, there it went. Great. Just to give you a sense of where they're located, a lot of data centers have been proposed in the Chicagoland area, but more and more, and as we're going into the hyperscale era, we're seeing data centers proposed downstate. So there's a big one near Springfield that was recently approved. We're hearing rumors of one in Champaign, but we put a moratorium on it. The few near St. Louis there. There's a really big one in Joliet that was approved. So this map is, again, sort of changing every day. And again, because it depends on what a definition of data center is, if you're including the small ones, you would see a lot more on this map. There's probably a data center in the closet of this building somewhere, right? But the hyperscalers are the ones that are really making this big policy difference. So what is happening? Why are data centers at an unprecedented scale? There's a lot of numbers on the screen right now, but what I want to talk about is energy consumption, because that is the main way that we measure data centers. And so I'm going to throw around a couple terms. A kilowatt is the amount of energy a typical home uses. Imagine plugging in the home. It would take a kilowatt of draw. You plug in your light bulb, it uses this much energy. Imagine you sort of average out the home's usage. It's about a kilowatt. That's what it takes to have a home. A megawatt is 1,000 kilowatts. So a megawatt powers 1,000 homes. So the size of data centers we're seeing proposed, we've got one up in Joliet that was approved not long ago, is 1,800 megawatts. So that's 1,800,000 homes worth of electricity demand. And the largest currently operating data center is in North Lake, Chicago area, is 158 megawatts, right? So approved, not yet built in Joliet. The same in Yorkville, not far from Joliet, is another 1,800 megawatt data center. The one in Springfield is 636 megawatts. So we're seeing truly massive consumption of energy for these data centers. And what does that mean in terms of how can we think about that? Chicago, if you plugged in Chicago, not the city buildings, but the city, the general demand of the whole city is about 3,500 megawatts of demand. So those two data centers use more energy than Chicago. One data center is half, and the two of them together are using more energy, or will use more energy when they're fully constructed, than the city of Chicago. This is genuinely an unprecedented moment of increased demand for electricity and resources that are going into these data centers. And to last put that into perspective, in 2022, Illinois used 15,000 megawatts of energy. As a state, everybody, we all together, congratulations, we used 15,000 megawatts of energy. And in the last 6 months, or since 2026 started, 4,500 megawatts of data centers got local approval in Illinois. Again, not online yet, but local approval and are in the process of being constructed. So we're looking at, in the last 6 months, they've approved something that equals a third of what we used in 2022. This should be genuinely a shocking number, because it is. Energy demand hasn't gone up for a very, very long time. And now that it's going up, it is positively skyrocketing, primarily and almost entirely because of large data centers. And the last side of this equation that I want to point out is the consumption side. Here we go. So when I say the numbers for data centers, that's how much they use. These are consumers. Data centers consume energy. So what's the other side of that? What does it take to make enough energy to power a data center like the Joliet data center? Again, 1,800 megawatts. Prairie State Generating Station is Illinois' largest coal plant. It's located in southern Illinois. And that power plant, that coal-fired power plant, produces 1,600 megawatts. So this one coal-fired power plant does not produce enough energy to meet the demand of the Joliet data center. That is the scale of what we're talking about if all of these data centers truly come to fruition. So that is sort of the overview of what's happening in the state to give you a sense of what's coming and why we're in this moment. And now Dawn's going to talk a little bit about some local considerations.
Thank you. In Decatur, you can't talk about data centers without also talking about ADM and Broadwing. In October of last year, Google announced that it was going to partner with Broadwing and ADM to power its Midwest data centers and use carbon capture and storage to bury its waste. Now, it announced that then it was using clean energy, but you can't take dirty energy. Broadwing is a natural gas power plant, or will be when it's done. That's fossil fuel, that's dirty energy. You can't take dirty energy and bury the carbon below the ground and call it clean energy. It's dirty energy with the dirty carbon stored underground. So this would be a first in the nation project. Google announced how great it would be, and everybody should, come and build their things here. And Central Illinois was more than happy to take the waste carbon for across the country. So a little bit worrisome about what that means for us here. Are we going to become another sacrifice zone? And it's setting a precedent. And you're going to hear about the precedent in just a minute. Let's, I got one slide in between here. This, that huge circle, and I've got a loud voice. I'm the youngest of 7. So let me just show you this. I will. I just want to show you, this is the case. Okay, I'll say that again on my. So that's Decatur, kind of in the center, and the quadrant to the lower left. And the area that is drawn, that is ADM's project. That's the area of review for the 99-year easement that they got behind closed doors with the city of Decatur to expand their project. And this would all be part and parcel. Google wants to store, 2 million metric tons of waste carbon below Lake Decatur. You should know above ground when they're talking about how much power is used, and if it's a coal-fired power plant, we're breathing in those particulate matter. That doesn't get buried below ground. That's in the air, making us sick. But the waste CO2 underground, that is buoyant. Think of the bubbles, like the industry loves to say, it's just like the bubbles in your soda, except it's not really, because when CO2 mixes with the saline water down below ground, it forms carbonic acid. And that eats away the rock. And it's always seeking a path upward. And it doesn't even become 90% inert for 10,000 years. Now, what's going to happen to the capstone that's supposed to protect it? Because ADM's already had 2 accidents, one with the CO2 that has escaped the capstone. So this will only get much worse. I'm not trying to sound like a nervous Nelly, but somebody needs to tell the truth, and you're not hearing it from your elected officials. We got 3 reports from scientists who are not captured by the industry last year. One from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and he said, I will level with you. The best science and technology today cannot protect your water from carbon capture and storage. The pressure that ADM is proposing sequestration, according to the other scientists said, is likely to cause earthquakes big enough to break that capstone and allow the CO2 to come to the surface. Well, as far as I know, you only have one Lake Decatur, and that's your water source. And by the way, a lot of these things are talked about in our data brief called Data Centers Dirty Secrets. We have copies at the table in the back. What's happening here has been lifted up. Other data centers are paying attention to it. Carbon Herald said that by 2035, 41% of data centers that are powered on site are going to be using carbon capture and storage. So what's happening here really is setting a precedent. And not only do we not want it in our backyard, we should not want it in anybody's backyard. We worked very hard, the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition, to pass a bill called the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act in 2021. And that bill brought the Job Training Center to Richland Community College, training people in the installation of truly clean, renewable energy. And that law sunsets all fossil fuel and particulate emitting power plants by 2045. So now Broadwing is building or getting under construction now to do a power plant. These power plants, the life of them is all about 40 years. They're building it now. According to the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, they would have to stop, they would have to dismantle, shut down in 2045. Do you really think that they're going to do that, or are they going to then go and ask to be grandfathered in some way, shape, or form and keep polluting? So you just need to keep your eye on who's making the decisions, what kind of decisions they're making, and why they're making them. Data centers is all about following the money. The groups that are speaking here today, Illinois People's Action, we take no industry money, we take no government money. We're a grassroots organization. We take our marching orders from you. We're going to start talking about solutions. We'll be rotating in and out, but I'm going to hand it over to Andrew to start the solutions discussion.
We're going to do impacts. That's okay. We're talking about impacts. We got to do the bad news before some of the good news. So we're going to do an overview here of the various impacts that a data center can have, the things that you should be thinking about. If you hear there's a data center coming to town, these are some of the issues you might say, okay, here's what I need to know about. Here's what I need to be asking questions about. Here's what I need to be concerned about to protect myself and my community. So I'm going to talk about water first. And the first thing I want to talk about is how a data center works with water. Most data centers that we're seeing will get water from the community water supply, and they will discharge water into the wastewater treatment system of that community water supply. Some data centers will get their water from a surface water. They'll take water straight from a lake or straight from a river and then discharge into surface water as well. Some will use wastewater reuse. This is like one of those things that if you're going to make a data center, it would be better to be reusing wastewater as your water source. But again, the vast majority are attaching themselves to the utilities. This is what we're seeing in Virginia, where there's just a ton of these things. This is what we're seeing in Chicago. For many of them, there are some that are on the river and just pull water from the river. So there are just sort of, as folks understand where the water is coming from. Of course, a community water supply comes from nature as well, right? It's either coming from that lake, or where I live, it's coming from the Muhammad Aquifer. So you still need to be thinking about protecting and preserving the water quantities and the water quality of what you drink. So how much water and how do data centers use water? So like I said, a lot of this is for cooling. And when you're thinking about water in data centers, you're going to want to be thinking about both on-site and off-site. So on-site, meaning at the data center, they're going to be using water, if they are using water for cooling. And depending on the technology they're using, they can drink up a lot of water. And it all increases with scale. So the bigger the data center gets, the more water it's going to drink, because ultimately the point of that water consumption is for them to cool their data center. They got to get the heat away from their computer chips so that they can operate at their optimal temperature. So the bigger they are, the more heat they're producing, therefore the more water they will use. That said, some data centers use zero water because they're using entirely basically air conditioning or other non-water-based technology to cool the chips. That has other impacts that we'll talk about, but one of those impacts is more energy use, and that means you have more offsite water use. So all data centers use an absolute ton of energy, as I noted earlier, and when you use energy, and if that energy comes from fossil fuel power plants or nuclear power plants, those things are called thermoelectric power plants. They're all pretty much cooled by water, and they're actually one of our lead consumers of water in the state right now. So we're upping and building new fossil fuel power plants to meet our water demand, fossil fuel power plants to meet the energy demand of data centers. We're going to be paying water both at the site of the data center and offsite to meet the energy demand. So a bit more about cooling, just so you have a perspective on it. This spectrum kind of shows energy and water is really a trade-off in cooling a data center. So if you're going to be doing the most water-friendly technologies and not using any water, you're going to be doing that air conditioning. And that actually does have some challenges. You have more noise typically if you're doing pure air conditioning to cool your data centers. On the other hand, if we're doing our maximally water consumptive technology, you have that water consumption element coming in. And there are two closed loops and open loops who actually aren't really marked in the correct locations here. Closed loop means that there's a loop in the data center. No data center is truly entirely closed loop because the heat has to leave the data center. So there has to be some portion of the loop that is releasing heat. Now that might be a closed loop that takes the heat away from the chips and brings it to an air-based heat exchanger, and therefore it maybe is using a chiller tower electricity, or you could have a cooling tower evaporation where it's taking the water in the closed loop, contacting it with water that then evaporates away to create that cooling that they need. So these are just the different technologies that you'll see. It gets a little bit more complicated. The Alliance for Water Efficiency has a really great report, and if you Google Data Center Alliance for Water Efficiency, I just stole their slides because they're excellent. And this goes through actually kind of the water and energy balance of a lot of those technologies. And some of them do a lot better when you start talking about sort of your direct to chip cooling. They are both more water and energy efficient. They're also more expensive. So some data centers aren't going to do them because they're more expensive. And being efficient doesn't always mean less consumption. This is the trick. We want the data centers to efficiently use our resources, but that might just mean they scale more. So you ultimately have to be looking at the total consumption, what are they totally going to use, regardless of how efficient they are. Obviously, more efficiency should be better and desired, but and as you consider cooling technologies as well, one of the things we're seeing is air-cooled doesn't do it for the real hyperscalers. As they've gotten more computationally dense, as they get their chips closer together, as they pack more chips into the same rack, that rack is producing more heat. And to get that heat away, they can't just air cool it. And so the technology that they choose starts to, basically they have to do something direct to chip. So you're going to start to see that they have to do closed loop technology. So this is actually going to be one of the giveaways to know what kind of data center you're going to get, is what cooling technology they're talking about. Because if they're talking about air cooling, they're probably not going to be, or they might not be, a hyperscaler that's crazy large because they're just going to be air conditioning it. And as we get to the more and more intense usages, you get to the direct to chip technology. And then this image is just to show you, again, you've got loops. You've got loops of heat being removed from your components, and then from your racks, and then from your facility. Everything is in these closed loops, but remember, you've got to get rid of the heat somewhere, and it's going into our air or it's going into our water, period. It only can go into those two places. So you're either heating up the air around a data center, or you're going to be discharging it in evaporating water or discharging it into a cooling lake. So those are just the perspective on the water technology. I'm going to get into the challenges with why water in Illinois is so important, but I also want to just touch on the offsite water usage. Again, as we think about that immense energy demand, 1,800 megawatts for that Joliet data center, if that's powered all by fossil fuels use a ton of water to cool. And I want to put this in contrast with renewables, which don't use water to cool. So if you do power a data center with renewable energy, you're also mitigating that offsite water impact. And so these are one of the ways that there is some synergy in using renewables to power data centers, because it also means that you're not using as much water. So lastly, I just want to talk about the water in Illinois. Historically, we've been thought of as a very water plentiful state, and in some cases, that's still true, but we're beginning to see some cracks in specific moments, right? When a drought hits and when you're dependent on certain resources, we can see that, yeah, that's water's everywhere, but it's not here where I need it. So good examples, Joliet is now going to be switching from using groundwater. They depleted their aquifer, and now they're going to get a pipe from Lake Michigan. They've joined sort of the Lake Michigan system. And the suburbs around Joliet that are on the same aquifer are eventually going to have to do the same thing because they depleted their aquifer. Sullivan, which is down closer to here in central Illinois, is in a water crisis right now because their groundwater is running out. Do they want to switch to surface water? Well, they would like to, but the surface water resources around them are all tapped, and their treatment technology would have to completely change in order to treat surface water versus treating groundwater. When you change your water source, and if you're not ready for that, you get things like Flint, Michigan happening. So there are a lot of challenges that can happen when we hit these water stress moments. We just left a big drought. It has been a very wet spring, thankfully, but we were in a big drought in 2025. So water stress is coming. I'm not saying water stress is here ubiquitously, but it is coming. We do not have modern water law in Illinois because we've been so thought of as being so water plentiful. We never really developed water law. So our water law is like, you made my well go dry, I can sue you. Great. We don't have laws thinking about how do we want to share and allocate these resources that we all share and depend upon. So we need to modernize our water law. And we have water monitoring, but it's really not enforced because it's done with Illinois State Water Survey, which is a fantastic academic institution, and they don't have an enforcement arm. So you have to report your water usage if you're a large pumper to them. But if you don't do it, they can just say, please, and that doesn't always work. So we're vulnerable in Illinois, and that's a reason why we should be concerned about our water. And now I want to just touch on the other side of this, which is pollution. And the big thing to think about here is that transparency has been a real issue with data centers so far. And therefore, we don't really know what's coming out. We keep on discovering, you get these news stories about the Meta data center that just was flushing their system during construction. And then they were responsible for a rare bacteria showing up. They flushed it into the wastewater treatment plant. And then the wastewater treatment plant was like, oh, we've got this thing that is rare and we don't know how to deal with it. And it was Meta's fault, right? And that kind of surprise is what happens when you don't have a lot of transparency and when we're in this emerging moment. So we need that transparency to actually start knowing what's happening. Concentration effects are a concern. So in Washington, we saw nitrates become a problem. Now, the data center doesn't add nitrate to its water, but it does evaporate water. So if you have water that has some nitrates in it, and you evaporate out half of that water or 90% of that water, you end up with concentrated nitrates. And then you give that back to your wastewater treatment plant, and they're like, we can't treat these nitrates. We're not able to treat that concentration of nitrates. So the data center might not even be introducing the problem, but they can concentrate the problems that would otherwise be below drinking water requirements and put them above those requirements. And so there's a lot of system dependencies here. There's a lot of additives that will go into the closed loop systems and also in the open loops of glycols go into closed loop systems often, but if those leak, you've got to be concerned there. And then things like biocides, corrosion inhibitors can go inside even they'll be in the closed loop, but some biocides, for example, might be in their evaporative cooling systems. And we're hearing about also PFAS going into these data centers. They say they're going in the closed loop system, but PFAS is a forever chemical, so every leak is a forever leak of pollutants. You got to know about the technology and where they're discharging their water. Again, just a lot of considerations on the water side. It's a lot of we need to know the details of each individual site to really know all the different risk profiles. But the fact that there's a lot of different risk profiles and not a lot of transparency clearly shows that we have some big challenges. And now we're on to energy and Scott.
Jeez. Everybody happier after hearing all of that? That was new information. I hadn't heard that before. I wonder what it'll look like when corporations take over the world. One of the things that we try to do with the information we present is talk about, what we expect could happen based on what we see elsewhere. And if you haven't picked up on it yet, data centers use a lot of energy. And so in this case, when we're talking about our utility bills, our power bills, this is the one case where data centers are already causing our prices to go up before they've even been built. And one of the things that we try to do is pay attention, and we talk to people and hear what data center representatives are telling various communities, or you can read about it in the newspaper. I've heard some wild claims about data centers potentially driving down the cost of electricity, but they never explain how that could happen, or that you won't pay for any of the infrastructure that we need to build this data center. But they never tell you that, well, you're not set up in Illinois for that right now. We could do that. We won't, probably, but we could. So there are two categories that we're concerned about when it comes to driving up our utility costs, and that's on the transmission and distribution side. So we don't know yet, because again, like Andrew mentioned, those two giant data centers, we don't know yet how much it's going to cost for Commonwealth Edison, the utility up there, to build out poles and wires and substations and all of that stuff to hook that data center up. We know it's going to be a lot, but we don't know yet because they haven't started. But that is a concern, because again, you have a user with using that much energy. That's a lot of infrastructure too. And guess who pays for that, as things are in Illinois right now? Not right. Yeah, we do on our bills. Look on your if you're an Ameren customer, look on your Ameren bill under the delivery charges. That's where we pay for this stuff. So that's fairly easy to understand, right? That you build a whole lot of stuff, which utilities love to do, because then they get all that money plus a 9-10% profit back from ratepayers. So they love to build things, or utilities do. So that's fairly easy to understand. The next section here, the next cost driver that we're concerned about, this is where it has already hit us. So if you pay attention, on June 1st, our electricity rates, our supply rates went up again from 8-some cents per kilowatt hour to back over near 12 cents per kilowatt hour. About the same thing happened last summer. And that is because of capacity market. And I will bear with me while I kind of talk, because I think it's important to understand how this works, especially if you're hearing from people who are talking about data centers and we'll pay all the costs of that. And it's important to understand that these things affect entire markets, entire regions, not just, for example, the city of Bloomington or the city of Champaign. It has an effect on the entire region. Let's see if I can, what's the trick to making this? I think, oh boy, I went too far. We'll preview. Back one, yeah. There we go. Okay, so in order to understand capacity markets, we have to understand a little bit about how energy is priced and made, and the difference between energy and capacity. So first of all, electricity gets made by power plants, and it gets sent out over these transmission lines, and it gets delivered to customers. But at some point, electricity is bought and sold in Illinois on markets. So whether it's the utility procuring that electricity that you're using and charging you for it, so that's fairly easy to understand too, right? The capacity market is a little bit different. That is the promise that a generating plant, let's say that I'm a gas plant, and I exist to run 2 days out of the year because I bid into this capacity market. And I'll explain that in just a second. I'm going to make all of my money running a couple of days out of the year in this capacity market. So when the grid operator calls me and says, hey, we got a really hot day coming up, you got 4 hours notice to turn on and meet your share of this demand. And I say, okay, and I turn on, and then they send me a big fat check. In order to make sure that there is enough energy, enough generation, and enough energy efficiency and these other things, we're going to concentrate on the power plant to ensure that there's enough of that to meet the demand that the grid operator expects for a year. What they'll do, and take a step back, the grid operator, I mean the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator. And what is their function? If you look at this map, that's the grid that we are all part of. All the colors there that is MISO. It goes up into Canada as well. And you can see that the top third of Illinois they're on another part of the grid, or they're on another grid. So it's MISO's job to oversee the high voltage transmission, grid transmission planning. They allocate the costs of transmission, all of this kind of really boring stuff. But the good stuff is they ensure that we have enough electricity on the grid through those markets. They run those markets. They prevent plant closures when that's necessary. So if I'm this gas plant and I decide that I don't want to be a gas plant operator anymore, I'm going to shut it down. MISO first has to tell me that it's okay for me to shut down. So I can't just go closing down my plant because that might affect grid reliability. And it's MISO's job to ensure that we have enough electricity. They're supposed to adapt to state policies. All grid, the PJM grid for Chicago is also supposed to consider what the states are doing policy-wise. Don talked about the renewable energy goals that we have in the state. That is supposed to be considered when MISO makes these decisions about, hooking new gas plants up. So I tell you all of that to get to the point that they make sure that this capacity auction runs. So what they're doing is they're looking out across like number 4, zone 4 there. How much load do we have in Illinois? How much load do we have to serve? How many generators do we have in that territory? They do some really complicated weather modeling to try to predict what the weather is going to be like next year. So they know how many extremely hot days. They take a look at load forecasts. So if you have, say, a data center that's going to the utility and talking about hooking up an 18 or 1.8 gigawatt data center, the utility is going to report that to MISO, the grid operator, so that everybody's doing their job. We're being cautious here. And so MISO takes that in. They see that, well, this one data center has talked to 7 utilities in Illinois or in our footprint. And they don't have the luxury of guessing where that one data center is going to be built. Are all 7 going to be built? Are they going to build 2? They have to assume that all of them are going to be built. That is how they do their job to make sure that we have adequate resources, that the grid stays reliable. That means transmission. Yes. Sorry about that. I shouldn't have done that. So they take this information. They say in Illinois, we're looking at all of these data centers that have talked to the utilities. And, we're expecting that with 4,600 megawatts potentially of data center load. And they send that information out to their generators and they say, based on this information, we need you to pledge into the capacity market. In other words, when we call on you, we need you to run. Can you handle this much load? Now, me, that gas plant that only runs a couple of days a year, I say, yeah, I can, but I'm going to have to run more often than a couple of days a year and for longer durations. And so that's fuel costs, operations and maintenance costs, labor costs, and they're not eating that cost. Like they factor that into their bid, okay? And then we pay for that. We pay for them to be on standby. And so you can see up here on these charts with the number, the dollar amounts. In 2025, as of June 1st, the price of capacity per megawatt day, so the money that these generators are getting paid to be on standby, went from about $35 per megawatt day to $666.50 per megawatt day. So like 2,200% increase. And then in the fall, it went back down, fall and spring. That is why your Ameren bill went up last summer. The next chart, it happened again. Not quite as bad this time, but it's still pretty high, right? That's still a pretty high increase. And that is a result, that is again a function of these data centers that are just the threat of them talking to all of these utilities. And the job again of the grid operator is to account for this, to prepare for this. And so it makes our bills go up. Capacity is about 20 to 30% of our energy bills. Does that all make sense? Okay. Now, things could be a whole lot worse. We could be on the PJM grid, but in the instance where, so all data centers, they value a couple of things. One, they want to get to market faster than their competition. They want to get hooked up faster than their competition. And two, they want to be able to run when they want to run. If that's around the clock, it's around the clock. So they're going to bring their own backup generation. Now that can be batteries, it can be solar. It have to be a whole lot of batteries in solar. Most of the time it's diesel generators because it takes a very long time to get your hands on a gas turbine. It takes 5 to 7 years to do that, build it. Diesel generators are more readily available, and you can get them by the hundreds and be ready for a power outage. Well, so that, I mean, you can imagine the problems that causes with noise. As we see over here, there's a gentleman from the city of Aurora. They have a large data center where backup generators ran for days on end because of a power outage, and it drove people insane. And it also choked them because of the emissions. Some concerning trend, something that we're a little bit worried about. So I mentioned that Chicago grid. They're in much worse shape than we are because they're part of the grid that goes out east and includes Virginia, which is known as Data Center Alley. So they have a whole bunch of data centers on that grid, and they are scrambling right now. PJM, they are, I don't know if they would say it this way, but they're near a crisis point where they do not have enough energy to meet their demand. They don't know, not sure how they're going to do that. There's been all kinds of crazy ideas about how they can make that work. One of the things that they're doing is saying that before we curtail a data center, before we shut a data center off to avoid a blackout, they put this out of the July 4th holiday. We're going to call on those data centers to turn on their backup generators. Now, again, in some cases that might be battery storage, but in a lot of cases it's diesel generators. And so they get compensated just like all of those other power plants. If you own a bunch of diesel generators, you can bid that into that capacity market. And if you turn on when the grid tells you to turn on, you get a big fat check too. So now we're subsidizing the data centers to produce power and sell it to the grid. That's fine if that power isn't located near a community and choking them with fumes. But it's also very, very expensive. So we all pay for that cost. So I think that, I'll turn that back to Andrew now to talk about more about air pollution, as if we didn't have enough.
And there's actually not that much more to say about air pollution besides that, we're seeing examples like Musk's Colossus data center where they built this near an EJ Black community, and the nitrogen dioxide from running their diesel generators is now impacting the air quality and the health of that community. And so if we're going to be treating these power plants, these data centers, like they're power plants, we've got some serious problems, and we need to get some echo. Thank you. Okay. We've got some serious problems, and we need to really make sure that they can't do this. And actually, we have there is a law that tried to clamp down on this, and the data centers snuck in a loophole, and we're going to close that loophole with the Power Act. That's one of many things we'll tell you about the Power Act shortly. So I do want to just touch on facility size. These things are really big, and one of the things we often hear is concerns about prime farmland, and I did want to just kind of draw a distinction between data centers and solar projects. We're organizations that really support solar and think it's important and part of the future. And sometimes that means it's going on farmland if that's what's economic. And the difference between a data center and a solar project is that if you put a data center, you are putting a concrete slab that's 6 to 12 foot deep, and that's never going to be farmland again. That's now a data center, and when it stops being a data center, it's going to be probably a warehouse or who knows what, but it's never going to be farmed again. Where in many cases, solar projects can come back out, that is land that is being rented, and it's a use of the land, but it is not giving up that land as farming forever. But we do see that data centers are large. They're like I said, the one in Joliet's about the size of Central Park. So these footprints are big. Solar, it would have a bigger footprint for sure, but solar isn't a full forever commitment. I want to talk a bit about decommissioning and stranded assets. And this is really a concern for communities when you're thinking about the economics of a data center. And I'm not an economist, I'm a civil engineer by education. But I will say, I think there's one of two ways this goes. One is the AI is real. It meets all the promises we need. And these companies are competing to have the best AI. And to compete, they need to build these hyperscale data centers that can train up the best AI. And so they are all building their workhorses, racehorses across the country so that they can race to the best model. What happens when that race ends? Are all these data centers, that hyperscale data centers that are very expensive to run, are they going to be used? They have to pay for all that electricity too to run these data centers. And if they're not training AI models anymore because somebody else won the battle and they went out of business, venture capital is no longer flying off the shelf and into these companies. Well, those data centers, even in a world where AI meets all of its promises, they might be empty, or they might be running at a fraction of the capacity. And then they're going to say, yeah, we said here's the property tax, but we're only getting this much. So this is, the promises may not last. And then the other side, let's say AI is a bubble and it pops and it goes away. Obviously, same problem. But I see this problem as a real possibility either way. And communities need to be thinking about this. What happens when you have a data center left over? What happens to the facility? Who owns them? Do they just become warehouses? Do they just sit there forever and become a eyesore on the landscape? That is something that I just think communities need to be thinking about, and it's not a part of the conversation that I hear as often because I think everybody's just wrapped up in the moment and not thinking about what the market looks like in 10, 15 years. And then I want to talk about jobs briefly. Data centers bring primarily construction jobs, and this is actually why construction unions are thrilled with the data center build out. There are so many construction jobs that are happening right now. And when I talk to folks in labor, and I would expect them to be, have some concerns about AI and taking jobs, and they're really in support of data centers. And I get it. If your job is to build buildings, and yeah, it's a temporary job, but every job you have is temporary. But from the community perspective, you want to be asking, are these local jobs? And the long-term jobs are not really, they're not really that. 20% is the stat here. As these things get bigger, I think the stat's even less than 20%. And you want to be making sure you have a very clear-eyed vision of what are the local jobs that are being brought. Are they bringing in a company or bringing in other folks to build these, or are they being built by your community? So that's another major concern that I want to make sure communities are thinking about when they're considering the a data center. Okay, and now we're on to some solutions. So here's the good news. We've got some good solutions to propose for data centers. Nothing is perfect. I would say we need responses at all levels of government to really do this. And Dawn's going to talk about more about what's happening at the county level, but I'm going to share a little bit about a state level solution called the Power Act. The Power Act is a piece of legislation. You can look it up and read it. It's 600 pages long. But if you want to read it, it is HB 5513. You go to ilga.gov and or SB 4106. Parts of the bill are the water parts, which I had a big hand in, are quite readable, and I'm proud of that. So page 178. So we had tackled three major issues with the Power Act: water, community, energy. And these were kind of as we were thinking about the issues, the buckets we tried to solve them in. So I'm gonna walk you through a little bit about what's in the bill. Obviously, it is 600 pages, so I won't be able to tell you everything. But I'll touch on water first. So the key part is that we've got a new permit called a water impact permit that we're gonna require data centers to get. And the really thing I want to underscore here is that permit is a yes or no based on an analysis of whether or not that data center will have an adverse impact on our water resources. So if they're going to have an adverse impact, that's a no. And that data center either does not get built or it needs to make a water plan such that they're not going to have that adverse water resources impact. And that determination is based on an analysis that will be done by the Illinois State Water Survey. They're our water experts. They've got the data on our rivers and our lakes, and they understand how to do the analysis that would look at what would this water withdrawal do to our water systems. So that is a really key part. This is a regulatory permit that has the power to say no to a data center. We also have other important requirements, things like making sure their cooling systems are at least as efficient as closed loop to eliminate some of the really water consumptive cooling technologies. We also make sure that they pay their infrastructure costs. So just like Scott mentioned about how we're going to pay for their electricity infrastructure, I also don't want water ratepayers to pay for the water infrastructure. And so we make sure that the data center pays all the water infrastructure costs. And we do this by requiring them to do some basic planning. I'm actually sure they're already doing this planning. They just have to tell us about it now, put it on a publicly available website, and do ongoing reporting of that water use posted on that website. And then that information is what becomes the basis of both the water impact permit and the report that the Illinois State Water Survey will do. A couple other things, we make them do a scarcity plan as well, and now we're actually asking for pollution reporting. So, the data center has various sort of like reporting requirements that feed into the permit structure, and that permit's renewed every 5 years. If they end up using more water than they promised, they're going to have to get they immediately have to get a new permit. So we've got that backstopped pretty well. On the community side, so first we close that loophole that I mentioned. We're going to stop excessive air pollution at data centers. They no longer get this 24-hour exemption from having to hit their limits on their air pollution permit if they have to kick on their generators. So we're keeping them to their air pollution permits, which is what you think that they would have to do. We're also requiring a cumulative impacts assessment for environmental justice communities. So if there is a community that has a disproportionate amount of air pollution, the data center is viewed in the context of that other air pollution, not just as a standalone. So it's not just about how much pollution that data center is making. It's like, what is this community experiencing? And will this become the thing that pushes that burden too high? So it brings in that context. Transparency, 2 critical elements. 1, require a community benefits agreement, and 2, ban non-disclosure agreements. So you got to keep everything transparent. Nothing behind closed doors, and work with the community to come up with a benefits agreement so that the data center is providing a benefit to the community that is determined by members of that community. Also, again, transparency, public notice of any permits, citing, that sort of thing. And lastly, we create a public benefits and affordability fund. This is a fund that data centers, hyperscale data centers only, so that's 50 megawatts and above, have to pay into, and that's going to go into programs like low-income bill assistance, weatherization programs. It's going to also go to the environmental justice grants to support communities that have historically been burdened most by energy pollution. And that brings me to the energy stuff. And that brings us to Scott.
So all those problems that I just discussed, fortunately and unfortunately, the solutions are a bit easier to understand. That's unfortunate because there's only so much that we can do at the state level to offset some of those problems, because again, we are part of a larger grid. So on that infrastructure cost side, it's pretty simple. The way that it works right now in Illinois is that everything, costs get allocated. We know how much it's going to cost for anything to deliver electricity to us through utility tariffs. So the utilities write these tariffs. They get approved by the Illinois Commerce Commission, and that governs how we as residential ratepayers, it tells us how much we're going to have to pay for which services. So what we propose is that if a utility is going to make a deal with a data center, they need to create a data center tariff. They can call it whatever they would like to, but the only customers within that tariff, within that customer class, are data centers. So if in this instance where Andrew mentioned, where a data center, we build all this infrastructure and it turns out that they don't need that much, they're kind of losing the race or whatever. And that 1,800 megawatts, now it's more like 900 megawatts. Instead of the utility saying, well, we're going to recover that money from somebody, or maybe the data center went out of business, they would normally come and take that from us, because right now their customers only put down a deposit for, say, $200,000 to build $50 million worth of infrastructure. If the data center goes away, if they're not around for the next 30, 40 years, they come and get that from the rest of us. Again, what we're saying is this tariff class for data centers, you can only recover costs from within that tariff class. You can only recover it from other large loads or other data centers. On the capacity side, again, there's not a whole lot we can do in the state of Illinois to impact the capacity markets. So, but what we can do is we can say that for data centers that are coming here, you have to bring your own generation and your own capacity, meaning you are not adding or taking anything away from everybody else. Now, we in the Power Act are making a demand for clean energy, wind, solar, storage. And people say, well, that is that's a lot of solar, is it not? Like, it is, but this is a pretty big problem. And I don't think that we're in any position to be tolerating any more stress on our bills and on our grid and on our communities. So that's just the way that it's going to have to be. If a data center does that, now it's not going to be a requirement. That's kind of we're trying to entice them with carrots and not sticks. I mentioned a minute ago that data centers have a couple of main priorities. One is beating their competition to getting hooked up and running. So we're telling them that the more energy and capacity, clean energy and capacity that you bring, the further up in line you can cut. So if you're going to offset 100% of your usage and your capacity, then you go to the front of the line. We'll make sure you get hooked up first. Otherwise, you're in danger of being curtailed. So if you're only going to bring half, then there's a chance that when we need to start, how do you say it, like blackouts or brownouts, I don't want it to sound that dramatic, but load shedding or curtailing, then half of your load can be shut off. And so that means that you might not be able to operate. When we put those backup generator rules in place, they can't just say, oh, fine, we'll run our generators for the next 3 days then. They won't be able to do that. So that's the enticement. That's what we're asking them to do. And just a quick note, because all of this that we've been talking about, we're driving this policy through the investor-owned utilities, Ameren, ComEd, and Mid-American. But Illinois has a lot of municipal and co-op utilities. And one thing that we're worried about is we see the case in Sangamon County that Andrew talked about, that good-sized data center in Sangamon County. They're going to hook up to a co-op. Batavia just approved a data center. They're a municipal utility. Rather than them planning on where's this energy going to come from, they just said, well, that's your problem, data center. You go to the market and buy your own power. So that's pulling from the pool. So they laid this problem off on everybody else. We want to avoid that, but we also want to avoid putting regulations on the investor-owned utilities. And then we create a situation where all the data centers now are just going to run to a co-op or a municipal utilities like, oh, there are no rules. We're seeing this in other states where the data center is becoming, in some cases, the only customer this co-op has anymore. Or they have become so large, they're by far the biggest customer if you have a fairly small co-op. So we want the same protections for co-op members and owners and ratepayers of municipal utilities. This isn't full-on regulation of these unregulated utilities, but we need to make sure that just because you are, you're not an Ameren customer, that you're just left that you don't have any protections from any of this. We need to ensure that everybody's protected. And that is it for me. And Don.
Okay, looking at solutions at more of a local level. Several jurisdictions in Illinois have moratoriums. I think here in Decatur, it started at 6 months and then went to 12 months. But did you hear the angst about the data centers needing to beat out their partners? So they're trying to rush, and they're coming to county boards and city councils and saying, work with us. And what they do is they're future focused, and it's looking through rose colored glasses, right? We're going to add, we're going to increase your tax base. We're going to provide jobs, even if they're only 2 years of jobs. You just hear about all of these wonderful things. And what they don't do is they will never tell the city or the county what worst case scenarios might be. This is why we need the moratoria, is so that we have time. If you have 12 months, we should be using that time locally to really investigate these things. Not a rush to get it because they've told you, hey, we have better offers elsewhere. And if they say that and they don't want to work in making sure it's good, then you should say, fine, go elsewhere. If it's too good to be true, it's not true, right? I mean, we need more common sense approach. Now, what I am hearing, and I have been to a number of different meetings in different counties and different municipalities. And Monday, I spent an hour and a half with the local Citizens Volunteer Advisory Council to the Macon County Board, okay? And there were some good things that were discussed, but those are closed meetings. We're going to talk about that later. Closed meetings. And when members are somebody from ADM and somebody from Ameren and somebody from Labor and somebody from the city of Decatur and somebody from Mount Zion and a former state senator and, you know, a realtor, I mean, does that really look like those of us that are concerned about things sitting here in this audience? You know, is that really the Citizens Advisory Board you want to see? Yeah, me either. And so one of the things that I proposed was using a Charlie Munger approach, and he was, I'm going to blank. Buffett. He was Warren Buffett's investment partner. And what he did is he said, quit looking at what the benefits are going to be. Start with what's the worst possible outcome you could have from this? What's the worst possible outcome for your water? What's the worst possible outcome in terms of electricity? You know, and then determine, is that something you can work around, you know, to plan a different way? And if you can't, don't invite them in, you know, because they're going to come, they're going to do what happened in, I think it was mentioned earlier, a Colorado data center promising that they won't take one drop of water out of the Colorado River, which is really stressed, right? And now they have just sued to take 28 million gallons a day from the Colorado River. So you better know that what they're promising you now is not what you're going to get. Don't believe it. Don't believe it. So the moratoria are good, but we shouldn't allow our county boards or our city councils to rush. Use that 12 months, due diligence, have lots of open meetings, invite the community in, have a citizens advisory council that is really citizens. You know, I'm so tired of hearing about, well, the public just doesn't understand this. Please, the public understands a lot more than most of our elected officials. Yes. No moratorium. She said there's no moratorium indicator right now. There are ordinances too that are being passed. Aurora, I have reviewed the Aurora ordinance. You know, it has some really pretty good protective things in it. But one of the problems is if there is a violation, you know, you heard even about the water studies and, you know, they have to pay. Well, like in most of the proposals that I have seen, a violation or a fine for overuse of water is anywhere from $500 a day to $1,000 a day. Now, if you are Google, I want to make a comparison. Google does somebody making $60,000 a year, which is a really good salary in my book as a community organizer. That would be like us paying 10 thousandths of 1 cent a day. Now, is that going to deter somebody from doing wrong? We need deterrence levels of penalties for violations. And, you know, when they pay, these are the richest companies in the world. They can afford to pay for the water they're using. They will drink us all dry before they worry about what they might have to pay in fines. So let's take a look here at, oh, I thought I had this down last time. People power, because that's what we've got. There's a lot of people in this room. If you aren't already involved, get engaged in the fight. You know, the things that we are fighting for are no non-disclosure agreements. Well, you can hold your clapping to the end because the list is long. We don't want, or we do want 100% transparency. We want the right to attend any meeting, and we want our own people in those meetings. When it says no bifurcating or trifurcating, that's dividing things out. So like, you know, at this picture, by the way, was taken at the EPA hearing on Broadwing. 160 plus people came. dozens testified, all against Broadwing, except two. And one of those two was a representative for Broadwing, and the other one was from labor. And even he was kind of iffy, like, but we want the jobs, right? So we don't, they were trying to separate it from ADM or separate it from the data center. Listen, if you are building power and saying, we're going to build it, you can come. Have you heard that? If they build it, they will come. Yeah, that's what Broadwing is doing, and ADM. We'll take your waste CO2. We'll put it here. Those ADM execs don't live here anymore. In 2014, they all moved to Chicago. They're not going to live with the side effects of it. So, no saying we're only going to look at a little slice. You got to look at the whole picture and what that's going to do to Decatur. We have a motto: nothing about us without us. We're going to ask you to come up at the end and sign the banner that we're going to deliver to the county board chair. We hope you'll be with us when we do that. The right to say no. That should exist. 71% of Americans don't want a data center in their community. When do we actually get to have what we say we want and to not have what we say we don't want? Yeah, listen to us. We don't want it. No. Prioritize us. We need to tell our elected officials, prioritize us. That's your job. Your job is the safety and well-being of the constituents. The only reason you have power is we voted you in. We can vote you out again. And we need to support the Power Act. So when they are saying, come to lobby day, we need to come to lobby day. And we need to demand that the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act be enforced, and none of this grandfathering in companies or polluting power plants that want to stay open longer than the 2045 shutdown. So I'm going to turn it back over to you now, Andy.
Okay, and I'm gonna go quick because I'm feeling the heat here too. Just to say, I am on the Champaign County task force. We have a moratorium in Champaign County, and I'm on the task force where we're coming up with a new ordinance for Champaign County. And that task force has 2 community members. It's got me. It's got someone from the Farm Bureau. It's got somebody from labor. It's got a couple of county board members. Like, I feel like it's doing a good job of representing the community. We meet once every 3 weeks, and everybody from the public is invited to give comment every single time. So it's been a good experience so far, and I think a good model for communities to follow to develop a responsible ordinance. Anyways, so some good news on the Power Act, and I'm gonna try to go really quick. Very popular. We did some polling. 3 and 4 out of 4 people support the protections in the Power Act. That's really high for any political polling that's ever been done. 3 out of 4, you never see that kind of stuff. So it's a really good sign, and it shouldn't surprise you if you've ever asked anybody about data centers. You probably hear them say, "I'm concerned." So it's popular, yet somehow we went a whole session. We talked about it a lot. Come on, go to the next slide. We talked about it a lot. And next slide, please. We had a bunch of hearings in the Senate, a bunch of hearings in the House. We had 2 lobby days with hundreds of attendees. A bunch of data centers, meanwhile, got local approval. We got 3 and 4 Illinoisans supporting the Power Act. We have multiple counties passing moratoriums, 22 town halls. This is our 25th, I think. We keep on doing these things. And yet legislators did not act. Next slide. In the end, despite the governor in February saying, hey, we want to pause we should pause the tax credit on data centers because we need to have a conversation. Because right now we have a tax credit for data centers on the books. Illinois, since 2022, has been giving money to data centers. The governor said, hey, let's pause that while we figure this out. The legislature said, nah, we like data centers. Some legislators stood up and said, no, actually, please, we don't want that. We don't want to see that in the budget. Take it out. And they were not successful. The budget passed and the tax credits were not paused as the governor requested. Next slide. So the governor said, all right, well, I'm pausing them myself because I'm the executive. So he directed the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity to stop the data center tax credit for I think it's a year. I forget if it's a time limit. And for the legislature to get serious about this and pass something at the fall veto session in November. Next slide. Next slide again, sorry. He also released a framework of what data center policy, what he would support. And this is the Power Act in large part. We've got some differences, but like 90% alignment is very exciting. So the governor's come out in a strong way. Communities deserve transparency and meaningful voice. Illinois must protect its water resources. Data centers should support the deployment of new clean energy. Just things that looks really good. So that's good news. And we have made some progress towards getting the legislature to start seriously talking about this. So that's where the Power Act stands. And it's largely good news. And I think Scott's going to take us away with some ways you can help out. I'm just going to keep going. Next slide. Okay, how can you help out? Next slide. These are quick. Okay, call your legislator. The best way to legislators, if they don't pick up the phone, their staffer does, and they tell them, hey, I'm hearing calls about this or that, give your legislator a call. We've got a list of House sponsors. I haven't updated this in like a week and a half. I'm hoping we have more, but probably not. It's kind of a slow period for that. But if your legislator is on that list, call them and say thank you. God, they love being thanked. If your legislator isn't on that list, call them and say, hey, please support the Power Act. It's really important. And I care about this because I'm worried about data centers for X, Y, and Z. Really easy, no stakes. Give them a call. You're probably going to talk to a staffer. They'll take a note for you. Next slide. Letters to the editor. This is a great way to make some buzz happening wherever you live. I imagine most of you live in this area, but if you don't, anywhere you are, write a letter to the editor. And if you want help from Lisa, our comms director right here, that's her email. Send us an email and say, hey, I'm interested in writing a letter to the editor. Would you help me out? And we will help you out. Next slide. Action alerts. We have an action guide in the back. If you grab that, you'll have this same link. This is a couple button clicks and you can send a message to your legislator. This is fine. Calling's better. But if you don't get this QR code in the next 3 seconds, the action guide is in the back. Next slide. And lastly, we're going back in the fall. And I want to see all you in the bus from Decatur, which there wasn't one last time, I think, but we're going to make it happen. So we're going to go back in the fall for veto session. There's going to be buses. There's going to be a rally. You're going to visit with your legislator, and you're going to be part of getting this thing done. It's either going to be mid-November or early December. Get on our mailing list, and I'm sure you'll hear about it if you'd like to join us. And if you've never done anything like this, it's really chill. It's a lot of fun. It's a cool way to see the Capitol, which is just a stunning building. It's worth going just to get a chance to be in Springfield and see kind of what this kind of like political energy looks like. Next slide.
Okay, it's here. I'm going to have John and Don, one at each end. I see a few people already came up and have added their names. Please, we're going to take questions, but we want you to start coming up now. Sign this. If you're interested in the delivery to the county board chair, come to First Presbyterian Church next Thursday at 11 for the meeting where we'll be planning this for the delivery, probably at noon that same day. So come and sign. If you can't come, at least your name will be on there. And we say nothing about us without us, right? Nothing about us without us. Nothing about us without us. All right, yay, thanks so much.
We also wanted to note that we're advocating for a 12-month moratorium here in Decatur and Macon County, as well as all the municipalities inside of Macon County also need to get a moratorium on their books. We have a dedicated web page on our website that is dedicated to AI data centers with contact information for all the elected officials at the county board level, as well as the city council level. Make sure you're reaching out to your elected officials, letting them know that we want a 12-month moratorium while sensible regulations are enacted.
Are you done, Adam?
Yep, we'll have a mic ready for the Q&A.
Okay, I just wanted to add, before we take questions in the room, I just wanted to ask a couple questions that were sent on Facebook. Bill Fairchild said, and this is probably for you, Dawn, there was a lake in Kenya that had a catastrophic CO2 burp, which ended up suffocating local residents and animals. What are the risks to life and limb for our local population and wildlife?
That is true. That was, I believe, Lake Nayad. The above ground CO2, because they put it under such high pressure. Think if you cook in a pressure cooker, that's 12 pounds per square inch. We're talking about 1,200 or 2,400 pounds per square inch for them to pipe it through in a supercritical state. When the pipelines burst, they unzip. And the CO2 is, it goes into the air, but above ground, it's more dense than oxygen. So it settles and displaces oxygen at ground level. And that is where you've heard about some of the accidents happening in the country with people asphyxiating. Below ground, it's buoyant. So that area of review where where it could raise and get into the water, that would not be like the lake or the pipeline bursting. But any place that they are piping it through a pipeline or they are connecting it to put it down underground, those areas would be vulnerable to those kinds of breaks.
Okay, and then Cheyenne Renee Young asked, will the noise of the air-conditioned ones, data centers, scare wildlife out of our areas? And I'll just answer yes. Yeah. And people seem to be voting on Facebook. No data centers got 3 votes, and yes data centers got 0.
Okay, we can take questions now. I've got a hand right here.
The rush, is the rush that we keep talking about, like our friends tell us, what's the rush, what's the rush? Is it about because they're trying to push the Power Act and they're trying to get all this signed and done and grandfathered before the act goes into effect?
I don't know. I think there might be a rush just because they want to build these things so they can win that race. They probably would also love to get in to grandfather in before we get something like the Power Act in place. And we are seeing them starting to respond to the Power Act because they're worried about it. You go ahead, follow up. Yeah.
17 states are being turned, 17 states as of 3:00 were being put on brownout and blackout alert this afternoon. And I'm wondering, are those states, has anybody, like Dawn, I see her shaking her head, are any of those states high data usage centers that are already in place, like Portland or Phoenix or Scottsdale or Colorado or those places?
Well, I didn't see that, but I would imagine that the majority of them, maybe they're not. But again, the point is that even if you're a state that doesn't have a single data center, you can still be affected by that again because of the big grid that we're all part of.
I'm just curious if anybody.
Sorry, I didn't see it. Yeah. Yes.
Next question.
CCS or carbon capture?
Yeah.
Follow-up question on CCS or carbon capture. I cannot find anywhere in the world where it's been successful. It's been around for over 20 years. All the relative paperwork that I've read talks about how it's great on paper.
Mhm.
And in the practical world, it doesn't work. And it's not only unsuccessful, but it's you say it's dangerous. So
Yes,
do you know
that
of
is
anywhere?
very true. Most CCS projects have been shut down, and it's a lot of investment to get them going. But I mean, ADM was the poster child for how we were going to make this work, and 2 accidents in the first 10 years of operating. And now with what they would do with the Google and the power plant, they would be putting underground 4 times the amount that they have ever done yet so far. And as I was explaining before, that the scientists that we got reports from said that that is a recipe for disaster in this part of the state where there are a lot of seismic faults. So it's not, once again, a lot of promises, but a hard time delivering it in a safe way.
Sorry, he went to the back. Yeah, this guy's got the mic. Get
Where
this guy
can
next, and then we'll go
where
to
can we find the scientists you keep referring to? Where can we find that data?
for the CCS stuff.
Mhm.
Dawn, is it in your guide?
Yeah, a lot of it is referred to in our brief there. Yeah, some of that. Charles Harvey from MIT and GM Zemansky, and Harvey is a civil and environmental engineer, and Zemansky is a water expert. So he was the one that we asked to study the Muhammad Aquifer. And if you reach out to me directly, I can email you those reports. Okay.
My understanding is that we need two sides to make a data center work. You have data storage and data processing. And you kept talking about chips and the need to cool chips and the energy demand for chips, which makes me think that the data center is more about data processing than it is about data storage. So my question is, of this energy use, what % of it goes towards storage of data and what % is processing?
That's an interesting question. I cannot speak to it directly, but I will say to train the AI, we're talking about those NVIDIA chips that we hear about all the time. Obviously, we're storing immense amounts of data online. You know, everybody's got a Google Drive and their Apple, iCloud, whatever. So there's a lot of information being stored online that isn't being stored at the hyperscale data centers. That's being stored at sort of your like neighborhood level data center. Do the hyperscalers have storage in them as well? It's a good question. I don't have that granular level of detail of like what goes into them. I would guess that the highly consumptive stuff is the thinking chips, right? The NVIDIA graphics cards that are churning through the parallel processing. All the details of AI, I don't fully have it down, but that's as close as I have to an answer to that question. Oh, yeah. You ready?
So is there information about how much of the carbon capture is happening already or has happened here in Decatur in terms of ADM's activity and otherwise?
How much carbon capture is happening at ADM? ADM isn't even capturing more than 10% of what they're producing in their own plant. None of the carbon capture that's being talked about, everybody on the ads they're pulling CO2 from the air, so that our planet doesn't burn up. That is not how carbon capture is being used. What it's doing is perpetuating fossil fuel use because they're capturing it from the plants that are doing it from the pipes, and then they're storing that. And so what it does is it tells those companies, well, we can continue to use fossil fuels because we are capturing the carbon. But what you see on the ads, it's just like when ExxonMobil is talking about their investments in renewable energy, when it's like less than 1% of the top executives' profits or bonus a year. I mean, it's nothing. They want you to believe they're doing good. They are not doing good, right? So it's a small amount.
Just to speak to the volume of it, because I remember these from working on this last year. When they had stopped operation, when they had the leak, they had stored 4.5 million metric tons at that time. And what they're proposing to store across the state is something like 200 million metric tons over, like if carbon capture scales up to the size that they want it to. So if comparing those two numbers, 4 to 200, the scale, the increase is really huge, right? So when we say things like, they've done this for 10 years and had 2 leaks, and now they're like, look, we did it. We're going to scale this up. That scale up is its own version, its own experiment of what happens when we do this at a much larger scale. Dawn's been working on this much more closely than I have, but I was working on it for the Muhammad Aquifer a year or so ago.
We've heard about the acidification that will happen if the CO2 bubbles up, or I should say when it bubbles up, because it will. Is there a method that the water can be corrected so it can be drinkable again?
Well, so the acidification is part of a chemistry issue. So the at least again, I'm more exposed to this in the context of the Muhammad Aquifer, which is a bit different than Lake Decatur. But speaking to that, if CO2 gets in the Muhammad Aquifer, it acidifies the water, changes the chemistry, and that changes pH balance, and that really means that you might have things that are there in the water that are stable or not sort of dissolving, that start dissolving. And so then you start to see, well, that arsenic that was in a stable form, and maybe we didn't even know it was there because it was in a stable form, suddenly starts to react and be present. And so acidification is a trigger that can lead to a number of other big problems.
Has anyone done any studies as to how to move the correction of whatever? Well, I haven't heard any real solutions yet. And what Andrew was talking about, arsenic, cadmium, barium, they're heavy metals and they are very hard to remove. So it's not like something that your local treatment plant is going to be able to handle. When this happens in a lake, and people that are using these resources, like when we were meeting with some of the beer makers, like they said, we rely on the water from the Muhammad Aquifer being pure, and it would change the chemistry and how things taste, even from using them. And obviously, if it's a heavy metal, that is going to create its own set of problems. But I am not a chemist. I have just heard, and read about the problems of them not being able to correct it at the scale it will have. Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What happens is it's the saline and the chlorides are released. And once you get chlorides running around, they're like scavengers. And the sodium, which is also, once you build up sodium, separate from the chloride, it's explosive. So you got all kinds of things going on. It's like a milieu. It's like trying to figure out what happened in the Big Bang. And nobody's going to spend that kind of research to figure out what's going on down in there because of the amount of chemicals and the reactivity of the chloride. Once you get the chloride going out, anytime it comes into contact with oil, you're going to get chlorinated hydrocarbons, and those are just, we're still dealing with dioxin.
Thank you.
And there's a lot of other things like carbon in the pipes that we make now.
Yeah. Well, and we need to. Yeah. Look, yeah, and let's just talk for a minute. Who knows what percentage of the world's water is drinkable? It's 3%, and how much can we actually access? It's in a place where we can get to it. 0.5% of the world's water. So is this really how we want to be using our water? And one of the things that we are pressuring local decision makers about is to, if you are dead set that you're going to go ahead on this, you must set safeguards that the public gets prioritized. So in times of drought, the water goes to the people before it goes to the data center. And the problem with that is what's happening in other places that have tried that is these data centers are so rich, and then they just sue the community, and then they end up getting theirs. So it's better to never let them in.
Um,
Yes, ma'am.
My concern is, one of the concerns is the loss of prime farmland. Illinois is an agricultural state. Have there been any thought or possible considerations to protecting our farmland?
Yeah, that's a huge concern. We've been all over the state doing these. Everybody has that. It's a huge concern. And it varies place to place. What we aim to do in the Power Act, though, because we want to stay away from those issues of local control. So that's why we encourage people, ordinances and county zoning to protect that farmland. McLean County, I live in Bloomington, and McLean County Board approved that you cannot put you can't put a data center on agricultural ground. But I heard 10 minutes. Oh, they're going to kick us out of here.
All right, one more question. If anybody has one more question, we'll take one more question before we wrap up.
I was just wondering if any consideration, I nobody's addressed this at all, the real estate value of our houses, is this gonna, if there's coal sequestration, you live anywhere close to the lake, what is gonna happen to our real estate values?
Don, is that something that you've looked into? Yeah. I can't speak to that, but I do know that the city of Naperville was dealing with the data center permit, and they had one of their residents who's a realtor, because the promise was that this will not cause property values to go down. And they found out, at least for Naperville, they were convinced that, in fact, it would make property values go down. But as far as the lake and the sequestration under the lake, I'm not sure. I wouldn't want.
I have heard if you have CO2 underneath your property, it's got to be identified in your deed. So that could affect your resale value.
All right. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you to everybody live watching us tonight. This video will be available online. You can go back and watch it. Thank you to our presenters that came out tonight. They traveled a pretty good distance. Some of them did to come here. So thank you all again. Make sure you stay engaged and let us know if you have any questions.